The land of China was once shrouded in mystery to the rest of the ancient world. China would continue to rise through countless dynasties and emperors for thousands of years, withstanding the ancient era, the Middle Ages, and now the modern period.
While almost every other cradle of civilization saw its original builders completely wiped out or replaced by massive migrations, China did something that actually defies the usual rules of history. If you look at Europe, 2020 studies show nearly 90% of the population was replaced by steppe turnovers. Yet modern Chinese DNA mirrors Neolithic Yellow River farmers almost perfectly. And get this, new 2026 data from the DHL_M1 lineage suggests an 11,000-year-old ghost bloodline survived in the shadows while every other ancient empire's genetic chain snapped. But before we chase that shadow, let's see why scientists tested every other cradle first, and why they found nothing but genetic dead ends. The genetic dead ends. If you were to take a drop of blood from a modern person in London or Cairo and trace it back 4,000 years, the genetic map usually looks like a chaotic explosion of different colors and overlapping lines. In Europe, the 2020 studies into the Yamnaya migrations showed a staggering 50 to 90% steppe turnover, which is just a polite way of saying the original inhabitants were almost entirely replaced by newcomers from the East. But when scientists from the Chinese Academy of Sciences and Harvard's David Reich Lab started running massive datasets of modern Han Chinese genomes against the ghosts of the ancient world, they hit a wall of silence that no one really expected. They used the Allen Ancient DNA resource to compare millions of tiny genetic markers, essentially looking for a handshake between modern East Asians and the builders of the pyramids or the masters of the Indus Valley. And the data came back with a big, flat zero. Here's where it gets interesting, because this wasn't just a casual comparison. According to Xiaomei Fu, a lead researcher at the Chinese Academy of Sciences, whose work appeared in Science in 2020, they were looking for specific signatures called SNPs and haplogroups, the ancestral breadcrumbs of humanity. When they looked at the genetic markers from ancient Egypt, specifically those linked to the Natufian and EM78 lineages, there was absolutely no overlap with the people living in the Yellow River Basin today. You see, most of the world is a genetic melting pot where people moved, conquered, and blended. But the FST divergence, which is how scientists measure the distance between two populations, was sitting above 0.15. In plain English, that means ancient Egypt and modern China might as well have been on different planets. Think about that for a second, because it completely shatters the old diffusion theories that suggested civilization was just one big idea that traveled from the West into the East. Melinda Yang, an assistant professor at the University of Richmond who published a major study in Cell, pointed out that when they sequenced 26 ancient genomes, they couldn't find a single trace of the Indus-like or Mesopotamian-like signals that define the Middle East and South Asia. Usually, when a great empire rises, it spreads its DNA like wildfire, but China's core genetic code seemed to have this invisible shield around it. In the West, you see haplogroups like J2 and G from Mesopotamia, or R1A and R1B from the European plains, moving everywhere. But in China, it's just the O haplogroup, standing alone, century after century. Now, you might be wondering, if you ever sat down to trace your own DNA, what ancient world would reject you? It's a strange thought, knowing that for most of us, our ancestors were essentially wanderers, who constantly traded their genetic identity for survival. But for the people along the Yellow River, that wasn't the case. Even when we look at the 2024 findings published in Nature Communications regarding Xinjiang, the researchers found that Western gene flow was episodic. It was like a brief rainstorm that never really soaked into the soil of the core East Asian population. The heart of China remained genetically pure in a way that is almost unheard of in global history. And get this, it's not just that they didn't mix with the West. They didn't really mix with anyone outside their immediate neighborhood. According to the 2020 study in Science, the northern ancients from thousands of years ago cluster so tightly with modern northern Han Chinese that they are nearly indistinguishable on a scatter plot. The only real shift they found was a bit of gene flow from the Yangtze River in the south. But even that was a local affair. Scientists found that the foreign admixture in the core Chinese population is often less than 2% when run through QPADM software, a tool that breaks down a person's ancestry into precise percentages. It's a massive bottleneck of resilience that suggests while every other great cradle of civilization was being overrun and genetically rewritten, China was just doubling down. It's actually quite jarring when you compare it to the Maya or the civilizations of the Americas, where the Q haplogroup tells a story of specific migrations and later massive European input. In China, that input simply doesn't exist in the core data. The 2020 research from the SID database confirms that these population shifts were almost entirely internal, driven by the expansion of farmers from the Yellow River, who basically acted as a genetic steamroller, but only within their own borders. They weren't welcoming the J lineages of the Middle East or the H and L lineages of the Indus Valley. They were building something entirely isolated and remarkably stable. But wait, it gets even weirder when you realize that this low genetic diversity isn't a sign of weakness. It's a signal of a massive, unbreakable local continuity. While the rest of the world was a story of conquest and blending, China's genetics suggest a process-first reality where the local culture and the local people were so integrated that outside DNA simply couldn't find a foothold. Every time scientists thought they found a link to a foreign ancient civilization, whether it was a similar pottery style or a shared myth, the DNA came back and proved them wrong. Every path they took through the ancient world ended in a dead end of mismatched chromosomes and foreign haplogroups. Everything scientists thought they knew about how civilizations spread started to crumble under the weight of these results. They had tested every great cradle from the Nile to the Tigris and struck out every single time, finding that China was the global outlier, the one place that refused to be part of the global genetic mix. It felt like they were looking for a needle in a haystack, only to realize the needle didn't even belong to the same set of tools. Every trail went cold until they stopped looking across the oceans and mountains and started looking deeper into the mud of a single river in China, where suddenly the data didn't just match, it lit up like a mirror. The Yellow River Mirror. The match didn't just flicker into existence, it hit the screen with the kind of clarity that makes seasoned geneticists stop breathing for a second. While the rest of the ancient world was a mess of wandering tribes and replaced lineages, the DNA pulled from the Yangshao and Longshan archaeological sites in Henan province, dating back to between 5000 and 4000 BCE, showed a direct, echoing connection to the people walking the streets of modern Beijing and Shanghai today. We aren't talking about a vague resemblance here. According to a 2026 study published in PMC that analyzed 1.24 million SNPs from Longshan individuals, the genetic overlap with the modern Han population is so tight, it's almost like looking at a family reunion across 6,000 years. Here's the thing that really blows my mind: the consistency of the O3A2C haplogroup. In these ancient northern Chinese farming communities, that specific Y chromosome marker shows up in roughly 60% of the samples, which is almost exactly what you see in the modern Han male population. Usually, 6,000 years of history is enough to dilute a gene pool beyond recognition, especially when you factor in the rise and fall of dynasties. But here, the lineage is stubborn. According to the research team at Peking University, specifically the work of Huang Yanyi and Peng Yu Hong in their 2026 reports, these people weren't just living in the same place, they were maintaining kinship pedigrees that spanned 4 generations within a single burial site. They were staying put, farming their millet, and passing down a genetic code that refused to budge. Now here's where it gets interesting, because this continuity actually shows up in what's missing from their blood. Think about the last time you had a glass of milk. Most of us take lactase persistence for granted, but the ancient Yellow River farmers didn't have it. And get this, even today, the vast majority of the Chinese population still lacks that specific genetic mutation. According to a 2020 study from the Chinese Academy of Sciences by Melinda Yang, this lack of genetic drift proves that these farmers didn't just survive, they thrived on a highly specific, millet-based diet that created a genetic bottleneck. They didn't need to adapt to the lifestyles of outsiders because their own system was so incredibly successful. Think about your own family tree for a second. How far back can you actually trace a single, unbroken root? Most of us hit a wall after a few centuries, but along the Yellow River, the oldest root isn't a metaphor. It's a measurable biological fact. Whether you look at the mitochondrial DNA groups like D and M, which track the maternal side, or the Y haplogroups of the fathers, the story is the same. The people of the Yangshao culture were already modern Chinese, genetically speaking, before the first pyramid was even a thought in Egypt. But wait, history books are filled with stories of the Mongols, the Xiongnu, and various steppe invaders pouring over the borders, and you'd naturally assume they left a massive genetic footprint behind. But the data says otherwise. According to 2026 genetic reconstructions from DNAgenics, the actual Mongol genetic input in the core Han population is often less than 2%, and steppe-related Y haplogroups usually hover under 5%. It's as if the sheer scale of the local population along the Yellow River acted like a biological ocean. Whenever an invader jumped in, they were simply swallowed up without changing the saltiness of the water. This wasn't an accident, though. According to the files at the NCBI, the Longshan people had developed these incredibly sophisticated social structures. We're talking about walled cities and highly organized clans that enforced their own social rules. The one match we see today is the result of those clans keeping their lineages tight for millennia. Even during the Iron Age, when you'd expect more external mixing, a 2007 baseline study that was recently updated in 2024 shows that external gene flow remained remarkably low. The genetic IBD sharing, which measures chunks of DNA inherited from a common ancestor, stays between 20% and 30% when comparing these Neolithic sites to modern northern populations. On a PCA plot, which is basically a map of genetic similarity, the ancient farmers and modern citizens overlap so perfectly that they look like the same data point. There is something almost haunting about the fact that a farmer from the Balagang site in Henan could look at a SNP profile of a modern tech worker and see themselves. They shared the same high-altitude adaptations, the same metabolic responses to their environment, and the same stubborn resistance to the steppe turnover that wiped out the rest of the world's ancient DNA. According to reports from EurekAlert regarding the Yang et al. Study, northern genomes from 9,000 years ago are still the best proxy for modern East Asians, entirely bypassing the massive ghost population shifts that defined Europe and the Americas. So, while every other ancient civilization we've looked at so far turned out to be a genetic dead end, the Yellow River was different. It wasn't just a cradle, it was a fortress. The people there didn't just build a culture, they built a biological legacy that outlasted every empire that tried to claim it. Every major dynasty change, every war, and every migration was just a ripple on the surface of a gene pool that remained almost perfectly still for 7,000 years. But hold up, this perfect match hides a darker, more disciplined side. Let's check it out. The Bloodline Fortress. The moment researchers from Peking University cracked open the soil at the Balagang site in Henan, they weren't just looking at old bones. They were staring into the literal machinery of how the Chinese bloodline stayed so incredibly consistent. According to a 2025 study published in Nature Communications by Huang Yanyi and Pang Yuhong from the Biopic Center at Peking University, the genetic data from 58 individuals dating back over 6,000 years reveals something we've never seen at this scale before. It turns out the one match we keep seeing isn't just a coincidence of geography. It was a choice made by the first patrilineal clans in East Asia, who essentially built a biological wall that outsiders couldn't scale. Here's where it gets really interesting, because this wasn't just a loose group of people. These were structured clans with rigid rules about who belonged. According to the research files at phys.org, the Y chromosome diversity in these northern sites was strikingly low, while the maternal mitochondrial DNA was far more varied. That tells us a very specific story. The men stayed put, guarding their ancestral land and their specific genetic markers, while they brought in women from neighboring groups. This wasn't a chaotic migration, it was a disciplined expansion. Think about that for a second. While Europe was being completely genetically overwritten by waves of steppe warriors, the Balagang clans were maintaining pedigrees that stayed so stable they formed the very foundation of the modern Han identity. Now, you might be wondering, what family rule shaped your history most? For these ancient farmers, the rule was simple: protect the lineage. But wait, it gets even weirder when you look at how they handled change. According to a 2025 report from Peking University, there was a massive cultural shift in these regions where people moved from millet farming to rice farming, which usually signals a new group of people moving in and bringing their tools with them. But the DNA says something entirely different. The ancestry proportions shifted, moving from a 60% northern signature to a more balanced 30% southern mix. But it happened without a massive population turnover. It means the ideas moved, the crops moved, but the core people stayed exactly where they were. Now, here's the thing about the uncomfortable truth researchers found. You can have a total cultural revolution without a genetic one. According to the 2025 evidence detailed in Greek Reporter, Balagang acted as a threshold site. It was a place where northern and southern Chinese lineages finally met and blended, but they did it on their own terms. Even when we look out toward Xinjiang, where Western lineages like R and Q show up in about 26% and 19% of the samples, those Western markers never managed to penetrate the heart of the Yellow River clans. They were episodic, brief flashes of foreign DNA that the core Chinese population basically ignored. Every legend has its heroes, and for the Han, it seems the heroes were these local clan leaders who enforced a level of kinship that acted as a genetic shield. According to the files in Nature, the researchers screened 80 individuals to get their 58 high-quality genomes, and the result was a map of people who were remarkably resistant to outside influence. They didn't need to conquer the world to survive. They just needed to outlast it. Yet even the most disciplined clans can't explain the deepest layer of this mystery, a ghost from 11,000 years ago that's been hiding in the code all along. And that's where the real shock comes in, with a lineage that shouldn't exist, but does. The 11,000-year-old ghost. Just when scientists thought they had the Chinese family tree figured out, they stumbled upon a genetic signature that shouldn't actually exist. This 2026 discovery has completely upended the pure northern origin story. While we were busy tracking 7,000-year-old millet farmers, researchers found a ghost population from 11,000 years ago, deep in the Paleolithic transition, named the DHL_M1 lineage. According to the 2026 report in Greek Reporter, this isn't a branch of the civilizations we know, it's an entirely unknown human lineage that was already mixing into the Yellow River gene pool long before the first walls of Balagang were built. Here's where it gets interesting. This ghost lineage rewrites the entire resilience story. We used to think China's genetic stability was just about isolation, but there's a hidden layer of prehistoric diversity acting like a secret foundation. While Europe's history is a chaotic mosaic of being overwritten, China's purity actually masks a much deeper prehistory. According to anthropology.net, these ghost hints suggest the perfect match we see today was a fusion of these ancient spirits and the later farming clans. Imagine an ancestor science can't even name yet. Would that be a total game changer for your roots? It's wild knowing that China's unbreakable chain wasn't just built by farmers, but by a wildcard population that vanished from the record but survived in the blood. According to a 2024 study in SciTech Daily, these layers prove that stability was earned through specific mixing before history was recorded. The uncomfortable truth is that purity is often just a lack of data. This DHL_M1 ghost fits no existing migration model, meaning our only one matched story is just the beginning. From the 7,000-year Yellow River match to the 11,000-year DHL_M1 ghost, the genetic evidence is undeniable. China's continuity is a global outlier. Was the Balagang clan system the biggest shock? Or does the ghost theory change everything for you? Would you test your DNA to find a hidden lineage? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.